I don't think I need to tell you guys about the situation of games right now. Big games from huge studios failing, investors are not interested in putting as much money before into gaming anymore, and indie games performing better than literal AAA games with millions of dollars invested. Between all of this chaos and madness, sometimes very rarely we end up getting gems like Clear Expedition 33. Amazing game and a monumental success for the studio, and it was a small indie team as well. However, as things are going, Cleared Expedition may be the last game of its kind. We may stop getting games of high quality indie titles like these forever because a huge shift in industry is happening right now. In order to understand what's going on, I want you guys to take a look at this game. It's called Alzora Radiant Echoes. This game was being developed by a small indie studio called Camellia Studio. The studio wanted to create a modern version of the classic JRPG games we all love and had a very similar inspiration as Clear Expedition. The studio had several veteran developers from big studios like Ubisoft, and they knew what they were doing. Just taking a look at the game demos makes you realize that their vision was clear and the game looked very polished. You can watch the game videos that I'm playing in the background, these are from the studio themselves. So it was a very similar situation to Clear Expedition. In fact, the team also hired talented musicians and artists and managed to raise over 300,000 euros on Kickstarter, 3 times their initial asking. This game looked promising, the gameplay looked polished, and the character and world designs looked amazing. So what happened? Why did the game with such a strong start and so many things going for it had to be cancelled, and why did the studio just shut down? It doesn't make sense, right? I mean, you would expect a game this good to immediately get funded in today's day and age. But the truth is much darker. Funding for games is at an all-time low. Just take a look at this chart. This is roughly the amount of money gaming startups have raised over the years. As you can see, the graph is just going down over the years and there is no sign of improvement. After the huge graveyard that gaming has become, with hundreds of games being added to Steam every day and getting so less success, publishers have become more and more wary of which games to support. Clear was actually very lucky to not only have a good development team, but also secured a really supportive publisher, which allowed the devs the freedom to cook such a beautiful masterpiece. Unfortunately, this isn't the same for every publisher. Many publishers, in fact most of them, aren't this good. They not only provide very limited funding and put time constraints on the developers, but they also enforce their own demands, which often at times just completely change the final product, and the game ends up being very different from what the devs had ever wanted it to be. Studio Camellia was in such a position. Even after such a promising game, talented devs and artists, huge Kickstarter backing, it wasn't enough to get them a good publisher who supported them with the money they needed to finish this game. Speaking of money, you guys must be confused about the Kickstarter situation. The game managed to get 300,000 euros on Kickstarter. How can it run out of money? Well, here's the thing about games on Kickstarter. Most games don't actually rely on Kickstarter funding to develop. In fact, Kickstarter money is mostly around 10 to 20% of the actual cost that it takes to develop the game. Kickstarter is mainly used as a pitching deck to approach publishers. Getting support on Kickstarter means that the target audience, the gamers, like the idea of the game and are willing to support it. Game studios then use this to approach publishers so that they can actually secure the amount of money they need to develop the game. In fact, here is what Studio Camellia themselves said. With all the support, we had half the development of the game covered and only needed to secure the other half through an industry partner. However, as you know, video game industry is currently going through a crisis. Many studios have been forced to close due to lack of funding, and over 20,000 workers have lost their jobs. Investors are now operating in a market where taking risks is discouraged, and they can afford to wait before committing to a project in order to reduce risk. So they had secured almost half the funding from Kickstarter and various government programs. They still needed more money though, which unfortunately they couldn't get as they didn't have a good publisher. And that is the harsh reality of gaming right now. As an indie dev, securing a publisher who understands your goals is next to impossible. And as game development is becoming more and more common as a skill among the youth, more small studios are popping up, all looking for publishers. Unfortunately, the number of publishers isn't growing at the same rate. Here is something the publishers of the Game of the Year Baltaro shared. They get more than 1,000 emails every year from small indie teams, all looking for them to publish their game. Not hundreds, but thousands. Compare that to how many games the publisher Playstack actually publishes on Steam, and you get the rough idea of the competition. Here is something interesting. Playstack said, "We would guide indie games to pitch at sub $500,000 mark. and perhaps to have some choices that can reduce or extend from this budget. We run a comprehensive forecasting process for every title we sign, and we want to ensure that the cost of development is commensurate with the opportunity we identify. We are seeing budget asks into the millions. Would we prefer to have 4 games at 300k or 1 game at 1.2 million? It's not impossible, but clearly, the higher the ask, the more we have to weigh up with which games we move forward with. And this seems completely logical, right? If I were a game developer, I would choose to make 4 games at 300k rather than 1 game at 1.2 mil, because that is the logical thing to do, right? We all know what happens when you bet too much money into one game and it just fails. This exactly is where the problem lies. To make a game like Clear Expedition, you need much more than 300k. You need investment in the millions. But if publishers themselves aren't ready to pay that much, how will you ever make a high quality game? Claire got extremely lucky with their publisher, but we saw that even after having experienced devs, a good game, tons of Kickstarter funding, and talented artists on board, a studio like Camellia couldn't manage to do it. So how do you think smaller studios or new game developers with not much experience will be able to get funding? It's asking for the impossible. And with the graveyard of dead games expanding the Steam library every day, the future looks worse. Big, high quality games like Claire need big money, which is just getting harder to obtain. And that's the sad reality of gaming right now. Unfortunately, as time passes, we will see less and less games like Expedition 33, and we will be completely reliant on AAA studios to make big games. We will still see indie games, but with the restricted budget, they just won't be as high quality as Clear Expedition. But thanks for watching the video, guys. I try to create videos on rising issues and current events in gaming. If you are a gamer who likes to stay up to date with current gaming affairs, I would really appreciate your support. Leave a comment on your thoughts about this whole indie game situation, and I'll see you in the next video.